I'm Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. We're executive directors of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Our guest this week, Cynthia McDonald, is going to talk about Black economic justice from an atheist perspective.
And make the secular case for reparations.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at ffrf.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
Today, we're talking about Black economic justice from an atheist perspective.
Our guest is Cynthia McDonald, a medical case manager, artist, health and political advocate, who works with Freedmen Descendants of Chicago, an organization dedicated to achieving equity in the city of Chicago and surrounding areas. Cynthia McDonald gave a major address, Black Economic Justice from an Atheist's Point of View, at last year's Women of Color Beyond Belief conference, and she let FFRF reprint her talk in the December issue of our newspaper, Freethought Today.
So Cynthia, thanks for writing that article, and welcome to Freethought Matters.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So before we dive into the case for reparations for slavery, Cynthia, could you tell us a little bit about your background with religion? Were you raised with religion?
Yes, I grew up as an Episcopalian, and I then got into more the charismatic, non-denominational religion aspect when I was in college. Lots of speaking in tongues and running and things of that nature.
And
the
noisy
yeah.
Christians.
Yeah, they're a bit noisy people. And I, after a while, saw that the noise and all the ritual was not really serving me any longer. And I messed up and read the Bible. And this was around the time period that I was studying to be a minister. And I had a lot of questions because what we were covering was not necessarily what was preached about on Sunday mornings. And when we got into the problematic things like slavery, like it's okay to rape a woman as long as you tell the raper to marry her, then it's fine. Or how I would get the apologetic about slavery, even though that we know that it was the slave verses in the Bible were absolutely used in order to justify chattel slavery in the United States. But it was always told to me that slavery in the Bible was practiced differently than in America, first in the American colonies, and then also America as a nation. However, we even saw that there was a very different way that it was explained to me versus what the Bible actually said. Now, it was always told to me that slavery was only a 7-year stint if you could not pay the person that you have a debt to. But when you mess around and read Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, you can see that you can buy slaves from the nations around you and then bequeath them to your children because they're your property. And I think that last time that I checked about chattel slavery, that's exactly what happened.
Well,
and
even Jesus in the New Testament, I'm sure you know, Jesus in Luke said that he showed how compassionate he was by saying there are some slaves that you should not beat as hard as the other slaves. There was even the beating of slaves in the New Testament.
Yes, there was. And then we can't forget how Paul said in Ephesians 6:5 for slaves to obey your masters, because
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
fit for the Lord. And then he basically repeated the same rhetoric in Colossians, and we saw it in Galatians. And so we know that in the Old Testament and the New Testament, this institution was definitely supported by the Bible. And going into the history of the United States, even before it was a country, as I stated before, this the rhetoric from the Bible was used by tons of Christian organizations, mostly the white church, like the Southern Baptist Church, which is the second largest denomination in the United States, was one of the main supporters through their preachers who owned slaves, and also elected officials who were also preachers who owned slaves, and new people who owned slaves, to say that no, this is an institution that is blessed by God, and therefore we should keep it.
So that must have been a big part of your drawing away from religion, but is other reasons made you an atheist? You just started to question all of it?
I did. I kind of went the route of first going from being a Christian to kind of exploring a little bit of spirituality. I got really big into yoga, and then, studied a little bit about the chakras. I had crystals, all that great stuff. And then I started to study Buddhism. Matter of fact, I became a Nichiren Buddhist, which is the Mahayana version of Buddhism, which is about mostly like you don't need a priest or an intercessor to become enlightened. You can do it on your own. And then through that practice, I actually started to reason myself out of religion and belief. Because even in that particular sect of Buddhism, there are no gods that you worship. It was mostly about self-empowerment, self-enlightenment, and becoming more aware and educated about who you are as an individual. But in that particular education, I realized that most of my identity for most of my teenage to adult life has been wrapped in the way that I believed and how I actually saw myself as a Christian and served God. But it was very difficult to then try to challenge that notion to see, well, who are you on your own?
So you said that blacks still find themselves at the bottom of every social or economic statistic except in their God belief. So why is this a problem?
Well, I think that I would love to bring up Hubert Harrison, who was a Freethought leader in the turn of the century. And one of the things that he said is that show me a population that is deeply religious, and I will show you a servile population content with whips and chains, content to eat the bread of sorrow and drink the waters of affliction. He also said that it should seem that Negroes of all Americans would be found in the Freethought fold, since they have suffered more than any other class of Americans from the dubious blessings of Christianity.
And you use that as your Twitter header, your profile quote, correct?
I did. I did. And matter of fact, it's kind of funny when we even talk about Twitter, because I recently got into a debate with an acquaintance of mine concerning this whole notion about Black people hate everything about slavery except for Christianity. And I think that it's very appropriate to talk about how before Western and Central Africans that were brought here through this transatlantic slave trade, they were not Christians. The institution was thwarted and indoctrinated upon them once they actually came within a generation or two in the Americas. Matter of fact, I read recently that Blacks that came through the transatlantic slave trade did not really become Christians in mass until we get into like the 1800s, like late 17, early 1800s. And it was also very appropriate and common practice rather, for the slave masters rather, to take their slaves to church with them, where they would hear sermons like the ones that we were or Bible verses around, and sermons around those Bible verses that we discussed earlier. So this is an institution that was used specifically in making African Americans who were enslaved at that time really look towards, I would say, work now before, and then you'll see heaven later.
Pie in the sky when you die, right?
Exactly.
And that's a
exactly.
lie. Now, your
lie.
Your article in Reparations begins with another quote from the author James Baldwin, who's yet another non-believer, and you cite Baldwin saying, "I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for that reason I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." So, Cynthia, acknowledging the wrongs of the past can be a positive, can't it?
Yes, because if we can acknowledge the wrongs of the past, then we can take the necessary precautions not to repeat them. You know, we are made as children when we are in school to take history. And we are then studying all the different things that has happened event-wise, whether it's different wars, economic plunder, or the like. And a lot of it is because we need to know about it, because we need to know the history of where we came from so that we have a better idea of where we're going, so that all the ills of the past is something that we can learn from and not repeat it. And then realize that, hey, maybe some of the things that we did in our past weren't good. It did not help our constituency. It didn't even help really build the country the way that we needed to build it. So let's take a different approach so that we won't necessarily have to repeat the ills of the past.
So we're going to take a break. We are talking with Cynthia McDonald about Black economic justice or injustice, generational wealth, the case for reparations. And when we come back, Cynthia, we want to get into the nuts and bolts of that.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no religious body seeks to impose its will, directly or indirectly, upon the general populace.
Let's restore respect for America's secular roots. Help the Freedom from Religion Foundation defend the wall of separation between state and church. Join us at ffrf.org. Freedom depends on freethinkers.
And welcome back to Freethought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with Cynthia McDonald, especially about her recent article about reparations from an atheist point of view. So Cynthia, let's talk a little bit about your impressive research on Black economic justice and generational wealth. Let's start some basic facts that you lay out in your article, that Black Americans are 13% of the population, but they only hold 2 to 4% of the total household wealth. Let's talk about that some.
Actually, it's less than 2% now since COVID. As far as like that particular portion of African Americans holding such little wealth in the nation, we can directly point to policies that contributed to that fact. African Americans were not able to really participate in a lot of the different wealth building laws that had happened in America's past. For example, I talked about in the article concerning the Homestead Act of 1862 and how this was an act where the government was giving away millions of acres of land. Last time that I checked, I believe that it was about 97 million acres that was given away. And it's very interesting that even though that this was a policy that started in 1862 and it ended in the mid-70s, the last portion of land I believe that was given away in Alaska in the early 1980s. And approximately 43 million white people in the United States are still living off of the wealth of that land. When you think of Cargill, when you think of Purdue Chicken, even when you look at USC and some of the other college land grants that were given in the West, all of them came at the behest of the Homestead Act. Only about 6,500 African Americans were able to take advantage of that particular policy. And if it went west, a lot of them lost it in land theft. And also, we can even point to certain massacres. I think there was like almost 100 different massacres that happened in the United States. Like we recently talked about Tulsa in Congress. The last 3 survivors spoke about how they were completely uprooted when they were children, when the township was completely burned down and bombed. And the people who lived there, who lost their homes, who lost their livelihood, never received any repair. Matter of fact, in 2001, I believe that what ended up happening is that the survivors ended up getting medals. They got a statue, and then there was some money put away for scholarship funds or poor people who were wanting to finish their education. And but the crazy thing about it is that these particular massacres were not just in Tulsa. They were in Rosewood. They were in Wilmington, Delaware. They were in Wilmington, North Carolina. They were in Atlanta, Georgia. We had a Red Summer right here in Chicago, Illinois. And we would see over and over again Black people to take what little that they had to build a life for themselves and have it completely yanked away.
And no reparations.
And no reparations. There was at least about a dozen townships in the United States that are currently underwater. Matter of fact, where Central Park is now in New York, that was a Black portion of the city of New York. However, by eminent domain, it was taken over, and then the people who were in that area never got compensated for their particular land to be taken away from them. And we see this happening over and over again. And speaking of even eminent domain, that's even how a lot of Black people will lose their homes to get very little to no money when townships or even the federal government picks an area that says, hey, let's build a highway through here. Mm-hmm. And then, you get your life completely uprooted, and you get very little compensation for it, so you don't get a chance to really build wealth so you can pass it on to the next generation. So this is a pervasive issue that has happened. I can even give you an anecdotal story concerning myself. My father was a Korean War veteran. Matter of fact, I am the daughter of a Korean War vet, a granddaughter of World War II veteran, and a great-granddaughter of World War I veteran. Mm-hmm. And when the GI Bill was implemented in 1944, this was supposed to be able to give the soldiers who served the United States in some type of capacity as a veteran in order for them to receive certain benefits like money for a home, money that they can use for a business, and also even for them to continue their education. And then when I started to work in admissions, when I graduated college, I found out that the GI Bill was even benefits that could have been passed down to their children if they wanted to. Well, my dad tried to apply for the GI Bill, even though he served 2 terms in the United States Navy when he wanted to purchase a home with my mother after she was about to have my second oldest sister. He filed for all of the paperwork that they requested. And then when he went to go look into it, he gets a letter that's saying that you've been denied, but never got an answer why.
Wow.
And then when you look in history, you see that one of the main issues that happened to a lot of soldiers, Black soldiers, is that the GI Bill was never awarded, or was awarded to very few people, because it was up to the states and townships to actually dole out benefits to the veterans that would come back from war or serving in the United States military. So if they were, especially in like a state like Mississippi, matter of fact, Mississippi showed that before 1970, especially like around World War II, when they had Black soldiers that came back, they only gave out to two people the GI Bill, 2 Black soldiers the GI Bill, out of the multiple thousands that actually served. And the thing about it is that we see instances of this happening in a lot of different institutions that were really designed in the United States to build wealth. Even if we're going back to the emancipation of slaves, and I use the term freedmen because that's a political status that was deemed to the newly freed slaves in 1865. They were supposed to get certain benefits from the Freedmen's Bureau, like housing. They were supposed to get food. They were supposed to get land. And that particular bureau was defunct in the 1870s. Same thing with the Freedmen's Bank. Matter of fact, when the Freedmen's Bank was set up, it was supposed to be a way for African Americans who were newly freed slaves to be able to use the banking system like their white counterparts in order for them to save money and build wealth. That particular bank only lasted for less than 5 years because the people who ran it used it for their own particular pet projects for their friends, and the particular savings and also accounts that the slaves or the former slaves had were not FDIC insured. So they lost all their money. Matter of fact, they tried to give it to Frederick Douglass to run. And he put about, I want to say about $15,000 of his money into the bank, but it was not enough to save it. Matter of fact, he called the Freedmen's Bank the black man's cow and the white man's milk.
You've written about how many people were cheated of their promised 40 acres and how that would be into the trillions today. But Dan, I think you had a question.
I want to talk a little about reparations and compensation. Seems like our government can find money when it wants to. I was just reading the book, American Uprising, about some enslaved people who rebelled outside of New Orleans, and the plantation owners put it down. They killed them. They cut off their heads. They put their heads on stakes. And the U.S. government found the money to compensate the plantation owners for the loss of their property. They killed their slaves, but the government says, we're going to be able to help you out. So can our current government find reparations for descendants of enslaved people?
Well, I'll put it this way to you, Dan. They found $6.6 trillion in 1 week. For COVID money.
For stimulus, yeah.
They, in less than 1 week, and because they felt that it was necessary for them to give the country an economic floor during a pandemic crisis, which I agree with. However, we still seem to can't find money for Negroes. I don't understand why that is the case, but here we are. It's kind of interesting that you would get pushback, because we know that at the very heart of reparations is to close the racial wealth gap. And if we're looking at comparing white wealth, which is around $100 trillion roughly, versus Black wealth, which is like less than $3 trillion now. Then if we are even to try to make it to the point where we're compensatory to our white counterparts, you're looking at least about 13 to $14 trillion to even get us there at that point. And I quoted, and I talk about a lot, the work that Dr. William Darity Jr., a Duke University professor who has done countless data collection and written about reparations and has gone all over the country to talk about Black reparations, even wrote a book with his wife called From Here to Equality. A. Kirsten Mullins is her name, where they really painstakingly farmed data and history points to really make that case. And, if we're even talking about like, where does the money come from? Because that's definitely a question and an argument that is offered to push back against reparations. And my answer is always, we can get money and from the same place that you get to fund the Pentagon, to fund Congress, to fund education, to fund infrastructure, which hopefully they'll pass the Build Back Better, who knows.
And to give all these tax breaks to churches, too.
Yes, yes, right. To give tax breaks to churches, faith-based organizations, like all these, it comes from the federal treasury. One of the things
we're out of time,
we're out of time. We're so sorry, Cynthia.
Oh my
There's so much more to talk about, but people can read your article at Freethought Today.
The December issue?
The December issue, the case about injustice, Black economic justice. And we're so glad you joined us. And I would say reparations will do a lot more than prayer, won't they?
Oh, yeah. There's nothing that's in our lives that cannot be solved without money.
Well, thank you, Cynthia McDonald. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Cynthia. And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.